I need a husband by tomorrow, or I lose everything." Beatrice sobbed into her apron, her heavy frame shaking in the dim diner light. She thought she was alone with her despair. She was wrong. From the shadows of the corner booth, the city's most feared syndicate boss stood up. The neon sign of Carmichael's all-night diner flickered a sickly, bruised purple against the relentless Boston rain. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale grease, burnt coffee, and quiet desperation. Beatrice Miller wiped down the laminate counter for the 4th time that hour, her swollen ankles screaming in protest. At 28, Beatrice, or Bay, to the few who actually looked her in the eye, was not the kind of woman who turned heads, unless it was accompanied by a cruel whisper. She was a size 22, with a soft, round face and a heavy-set figure that she spent her life trying to hide beneath oversized, aggressively ugly diner uniforms. Society had taught her early on that taking up physical space meant she had to shrink her personality to compensate. She kept her head down, worked double shifts, and bore the brunt of the diner manager Frank's verbal abuse without a word of complaint. She didn't have the luxury of pride. She had Lily. Lily was her late sister's 6-year-old daughter. Since her sister's tragic overdose 2 years ago, Bea had been Lily's entire world. But love, in the eyes of the state of Illinois family court, didn't pay for pediatric asthma medication, nor did it satisfy the rigid requirements of a stable household. The diner phone on the wall behind the register rang, its harsh trill cutting through the hum of the refrigerators. Bea wiped her hands on her stained apron and picked it up. "Carmichael's. Bea speaking." "Bea, it's Gregory." The voice of Gregory Hirsch, her overworked, underpaid public defender, made her stomach drop to her worn-out sneakers. "Gregory, it's past midnight. What's wrong? The hearing isn't until next month." "There's been a massive complication," Gregory sighed, the exhaustion clear in his voice. Lily's biological father, Richard, filed an emergency petition for custody this afternoon. He just married that heiress, Cynthia Davenport. They suddenly look like the picture-perfect wealthy family. "Richard!" Bea gasped, clutching the plastic receiver so hard her knuckles turned white. "Richard broke my sister's jaw. He's a monster, Gregory. He doesn't want Lily. He just wants the monthly state stipend and to spite my family." "I know, Bea. I know," Gregory said gently. "But Judge Pendleton is presiding. He's notoriously old school and heavily biased toward wealthy, 2-parent households. He moved the hearing up to tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Bea's breath hitched. The diner spun around her. "Tomorrow? But I don't make enough on paper. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment." "Richard's lawyer is going to tear you apart, Bea. They're going to paint you as an unfit, impoverished single guardian who works night shifts and leaves the child with neighbors. Unless there is a miraculous, fundamental change in your circumstances, a dual income, a stable partner to show the judge that Lily has a traditional family structure, Pendleton is going to hand her over to Richard. There has to be something we can do," she begged, tears spilling over her thick lashes, tracking through the flour dust on her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Bea. Unless you walk into that courtroom tomorrow with a ring on your finger and a husband with a sterling financial record, pack Lily's bags. I'll see you at the courthouse." The line went dead. Bea slowly replaced the receiver. The silence of the empty diner was deafening. The sheer, insurmountable cliff of her reality crushed her chest. She had 12 hours. 12 hours before the only light in her miserable life was ripped away and handed to a violent opportunist. Her legs gave out. She didn't gracefully faint. Her heavy body simply collapsed heavily into the vinyl booth nearest the register. She buried her face in her hands, her broad shoulders heaving with ugly, gasping sobs. She didn't care how she looked. She didn't care about the grease on her face or her unruly, frizzy brown hair escaping its net. "I can't," she wept aloud to the empty room, her voice a raw, broken rasp. "I can't lose her. God, please. I just need a miracle. I need a husband by tomorrow, just for a year, just to save her. I'd do anything. Anything." She cried until her chest burned, the agonizing wails of a woman who had fought so hard, only to be beaten by a system designed to crush people exactly like her. "Anything?" a voice asked. The word was spoken softly, yet it cut through her sobs like a straight razor. Bea gasped, her head snapping up. She shoved her tangled hair out of her eyes, peering into the dim rear of the diner. Booth number 7. The one hidden behind the massive pillar, usually reserved for teenagers wanting privacy. A man was sitting there. He hadn't made a sound for the last 2 hours. Slowly, deliberately, he stood up and stepped out of the shadows. Bea's breath hitched in her throat, her tears freezing on her face. Even in her isolated, exhausted world, Beatrice Miller knew who Leo Castiglione was. Everyone in Boston knew. You didn't read the papers without seeing his name linked to union takeovers, real estate monopolies, and whispered, bloody turf wars. He was violently handsome, but not in a way that made you want to approach him. He had the kind of sharp, aristocratic Italian features that looked like they were carved from marble, and eyes the color of a frozen lake. He wore a bespoke, charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Bea's life insurance policy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated an aura of absolute, terrifying control. He looked at her. He didn't look at her with the usual mixture of pity and disgust that men reserved for a fat, crying waitress. His gaze was clinical, calculating. "You need a husband by tomorrow morning," Leo Castiglione repeated, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "And you said you would do anything." Bea scrambled backward in the booth, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. I didn't know anyone was back there. We're closing, Mr. Castiglione." He ignored her words, taking a slow step forward until he was standing over her booth. The scent of sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and something uniquely dangerous drifted over her. "I happen to need a wife," Leo said smoothly, sliding into the booth opposite her. "It seems we have a rare, intersecting timeline, Ms. Miller." Bea stared at him, paralyzed. Her mind struggled to process the surreal nightmare she had just stumbled into. You know my name?" she stammered. "I know many things," Leo replied, resting his large hands flat on the cracked table. She noticed a faint, white scar crossing the knuckles of his right hand. "I know you work 60 hours a week. I know you order the cheap insulin for your diabetic cat, so you can afford your niece's asthma inhalers. And I know Judge Arthur Pendleton is a corrupt, sanctimonious fool who responds only to wealth and power. Are you having me followed?" Bea whispered, her protective instincts flaring even through her terror. "Don't flatter yourself," Leo said bluntly, though his tone wasn't cruel. "I own the building you live in. I own this diner. My men do thorough background checks on all employees and tenants. You are remarkably, profoundly boring, Beatrice. You have no criminal record, no secret debts, no hidden vices. You are invisible to the world." Bea flinched, the words stinging despite their truth. "If I'm so invisible, why are you talking to me?" Leo leaned back, his icy blue eyes locked onto hers. "Because invisibility is exactly what I require." He reached into his tailored jacket, and for a terrifying second, Bea thought he was going to pull out a gun. Instead, he withdrew a silver cigarette case, though he didn't open it, merely turning it over in his hands. My grandfather, Donato Castiglione, passed away last week, Leo began, his voice devoid of any familial warmth. He controlled the legitimate shipping and real estate arms of my family's syndicate. In his archaic, old-world mentality, he believed an unmarried man was a reckless man. His will contains an ironclad stipulation. I cannot legally inherit the shipping empire unless I am married. B blinked, the absurdity of the situation momentarily overriding her fear. You're a mafia boss. Can't you just threaten the lawyers? A ghost of a smirk touched Leo's lips. The lawyers are federal trustees. The FBI is currently breathing down my neck, waiting for me to default on the inheritance timeline so they can seize the assets under RICO laws. I have exactly 48 hours to present a legal, binding marriage certificate, or I lose billions. So marry one of those beautiful mobster daughters, B said, gesturing to her own heavy frame. Look at me, Mr. Castiglione. I'm a fat, exhausted waitress, covered in fry grease. Nobody's going to believe a man like you fell in love with a woman like me. Exactly, Leo said, leaning forward, the intensity in his eyes pinning her to her seat. If I marry a woman from my world, the feds will claim it's a sham to consolidate power. They will investigate her, her family, her assets. But you are a desperate civilian. A woman completely disconnected from my world. If I marry you, the feds will be utterly confused. They will look for a hidden angle and find nothing but a sad waitress trying to keep her niece. He tapped his finger on the table. You provide me with a clean, undisputed marriage certificate to satisfy the will. I provide you with the solution to your Judge Pendleton problem. B's breath caught. You would help me keep Lily? I will do more than help, Leo stated coldly. By 8 a.m. tomorrow, you will be Beatrice Castiglione. When you walk into that courtroom, you will not be a struggling waitress. You will be the wife of one of the wealthiest men in Illinois. My legal team, who make your public defender look like a toddler with a crayon, will obliterate Richard's petition before the judge even strikes his gavel. He paused, letting the weight of his offer settle over her. I will pay off all your debts. I will establish a multi-million-dollar trust fund for your niece. You and the child will move into my estate, where you will be guarded and provided for. In exchange, you will act the part of a devoted, quiet wife in public for exactly 2 years. After that, we divorce quietly, and you walk away a very wealthy, independent woman. B's mind raced. It was a deal with the devil. He was a criminal, a man who ordered hits and broke lives. But the memory of Richard's fist, the terrifying thought of Lily crying out for her in a strange house, eclipsed her morality. What about behind closed doors? B asked, her voice trembling. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, suddenly hyper-aware of her size, of the physical reality of a marriage. What do you expect? From me. Leo's eyes dropped to her defensive posture, reading her insecurities instantly. This is a business transaction, Beatrice. I am purchasing a legal status, not a bedmate. You will have your own wing of the house. I will not touch you. Frankly, I do not have the time nor the inclination for a real marriage. It should have been a relief, but the blunt dismissal stung her fragile ego just a fraction. Still, it was the assurance she needed. 2 years, she verified, her voice barely a whisper. 2 years. You get the child. I get my empire. B looked down at her hands, raw and red from washing dishes. She thought of Lily's sweet laugh. She thought of the absolute certainty in her lawyer's voice that she was going to lose her tomorrow. She looked up, meeting the icy gaze of the most dangerous man in Boston. Okay, B said, her voice finally steady. I'll do it. Leo didn't smile. He simply nodded, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. Good. Take off the apron. What? Now? I said we need to be married by tomorrow morning, Leo said, checking a heavy gold watch on his wrist. We have to wake up a state judge to sign the special waiver and issue the license. My men are waiting outside. As if on cue, the diner door chimed, and two massive men in dark suits stepped inside, locking the door behind them and pulling down the closed blinds. Bea untied her apron with trembling hands. She was stepping out of the frying pan and directly into the fire. But as Leo Castiglione placed a warm, heavy hand on the small of her back to guide her out into the rainy night, a bizarre foreign thought crossed her mind. For the first time in her life, she wasn't facing the fire alone. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Cook County family court on West Randolph Street buzzed like a swarm of angry hornets. It was 8:45 a.m. Gregory Hirsch, Bea's exhausted public defender, paced the worn linoleum hallway, nervously checking his cheap wristwatch. Inside courtroom 4B, the scene was already set for a slaughter. Richard Harrison sat at the petitioner's table, looking nauseatingly polished in a navy suit. Beside him sat his new wife, Cynthia Davenport, a woman so painfully thin and impeccably blonde she looked like she was carved from ice. They were flanked by three high-priced corporate lawyers. At the bench sat Judge Arthur Pendleton, a man infamous in Boston for his disdain of the working class, already looking at his watch with visible irritation. "Where is she?" Richard sneered to his lead attorney. "Probably overslept. Typical trash." At exactly 8:59 a.m., the heavy oak doors of the courtroom didn't just open. They were aggressively pushed wide by two men in dark, tailored suits who immediately stepped to the side, scanning the room. The low hum of the courtroom died instantly. Through the doors walked Beatrice, but not the Bea who slung hash browns at Carmichael's. She was still a size 22, her broad hips and full stomach taking up their rightful space, but overnight she had been transformed. She wore a custom-draped, deep emerald silk wrap dress that accented her curves and brought out the rich brown of her eyes. Her normally frizzy hair was blown out into soft, shining waves. She looked terrified, but she looked like old money. And holding her hand, his thumb resting possessively over the massive, flawless 5-carat diamond on her ring finger, was Leo Castiglione. Following closely behind them was Jonathan Kessler, the most feared, ruthless, and expensive family law attorney in the Midwest. Gregory Hirsch's jaw physically dropped as Kessler bypassed the miserable little public defender's desk and guided Bea to the respondent's table. Leo remained standing just behind Bea's chair, a silent, terrifying monolith of power. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Judge Pendleton barked, though his voice wavered as he recognized the man standing behind the respondent. "Mr. Hirsch, who are these people?" Jonathan Kessler stepped forward, a shark smelling blood in the water. "Your Honor, Jonathan Kessler of Kessler, Roth and Associates, stepping in as lead counsel for the respondent. And I must correct the court record. You are no longer addressing Beatrice Miller. You are addressing my client, Mrs. Beatrice Castiglione." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Richard bolted upright in his chair. "That's a lie! She's a broke waitress! She lives in a slum!" "Mr. Harrison, restrain yourself," Pendleton snapped, though his eyes were wide, darting between Bea and the mob boss standing behind her. "Mr. Kessler, I demand an explanation. The petitioner has filed for emergency custody based on the respondent's poverty and lack of a stable two-parent household." Kessler didn't just smile. He bared his teeth. He dropped a thick, leather-bound portfolio onto the judge's bench with a heavy thud. "Your Honor, You will find in that folder an authenticated marriage certificate signed at 3 a.m. this morning by a state Supreme Court justice. You will also find the deed to the Castiglione estate in Lake Forest, where the child will now reside in a 10-bedroom, highly secure environment. Furthermore, you will find the establishment of a $50 million irrevocable trust fund in Lily Miller's name, courtesy of her new uncle, Mr. Leo Castiglione. Kessler turned slowly to look at Richard, whose face had drained of all color. I believe the petitioner's claims of poverty are not just categorically false, but entirely delusional. If anyone in this room lacks the financial resources to raise this child, it is Mr. Harrison, who, according to my private investigators, filed for bankruptcy in Nevada 3 years ago, under a different surname. "Objection!" Richard's lawyer shrieked, panicking. "Sit down," Judge Pendleton ordered his lawyer, his hands visibly shaking as he flipped through the flawless legal documents. He looked up at Leo. Leo didn't say a word. He merely raised a single dark eyebrow. It was a silent promise of complete destruction if the judge ruled the wrong way. "This is insane!" Richard yelled, slamming his fists on the table. "Look at her! Look at her! A billionaire like him doesn't marry a fat, ugly cow like her. It's a sham! It's a scam to keep my kid." The air in the courtroom dropped 10 degrees. Leo moved so fast it was a blur. Before the bailiff could even reach for his belt, Leo was across the aisle. He didn't yell. He didn't throw a punch. He simply placed one large, scarred hand firmly on the back of Richard's neck and leaned in, his face inches from the terrified man. "Speak to my wife like that again," Leo whispered, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that carried to every corner of the dead, silent room. "And I will personally ensure your dental records are the only way they identify what's left of you in the Boston River. Do you understand me, Richard?" Richard whimpered, a pathetic sound escaping his throat. He nodded frantically. "Mr. Castiglione," Judge Pendleton stammered, terrified to reprimand the syndicate boss. "Please, return to your side." Leo released Richard with a look of pure disgust, pulling a silk handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his hand before returning to Bee's side. He placed a gentle, grounding hand on her shoulder. Bee looked up at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He had defended her. Not just her custody case, but her. Judge Pendleton slammed his gavel down like it was burning his hand. "Petition for change of custody is categorically denied. Custody remains with Mrs. Castiglione. Case dismissed. Get out of my courtroom." Bee burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. It was over. Lily was safe. As they walked out of the courthouse, the rain had stopped. A fleet of black SUVs waited by the curb. Leo opened the door of the lead car for her. "Thank you," Bee whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You saved us. I'll be the perfect silent wife, I promise. 2 years." Leo paused, his icy eyes searching her tear-stained face. "Let's just get you and the child home, Beatrice." Life at the Castiglione estate in Lake Forest was isolating, terrifying, and profoundly luxurious. Bey and Lily were given the entire West Wing. Lily, oblivious to the Mafia strings attached to her new bedroom, was ecstatic about the indoor pool and the private chef. Bee, however, walked on eggshells. She kept to her agreement, playing the quiet wife during the few public charity galas Leo required her to attend, dodging the confused, judgmental stares of Boston's high society. But behind closed doors, a strange shift began to happen. Leo, the ruthless syndicate boss, was surprisingly gentle with Lily. He bought her a pony. He patiently sat while the 6-year-old explained the complex social hierarchy of her Barbie dolls. And toward Bee, he was observant. He noticed she hated the chef's rich French food. So he quietly fired the chef and hired a woman who cooked hearty, rustic Italian meals. He caught Bea trying to hide her body in oversized cardigans and had a famous designer flown in from Milan to create a wardrobe that celebrated her size rather than concealed it. 3 months into their arrangement, Bea found herself in the massive industrial kitchen at 2 a.m. She couldn't sleep. She was making a simple batch of chocolate chip cookies, clad in a silk robe, humming softly to herself. "You're burning the butter." Bea jumped, dropping her wooden spoon. Leo was leaning against the doorway, wearing only a pair of dark sweatpants, his chest bare and covered in dark, sprawling tattoos and vicious scars. The sight of him, raw, unguarded, and dangerously masculine, made her breath catch. "I couldn't sleep," she stammered, turning back to the stove to hide the flush creeping up her neck. Leo walked into the kitchen, the silence stretching between them. He didn't pour a drink. He didn't leave. He simply stood beside her, watching her stir the dough. "You're shaking," he noted, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop, Leo," Bea confessed, the exhaustion of her anxiety finally bubbling over. "I'm waiting for the day you get tired of this game. I'm waiting for the feds to kick down the door. I'm waiting to wake up back in that diner." Leo reached out, his scarred fingers gently wrapping around her wrist, stopping her frantic stirring. He turned her to face him. "The other shoe isn't going to drop, Mia cara," he said quietly. Before Bea could process the Italian endearment, the jarring, blaring shriek of the estate's perimeter alarm shattered the quiet of the night. Red emergency lights strobed through the kitchen windows. Heavy gunfire echoed from the front gates. Leo's demeanor shifted instantly from gentle to lethal. He shoved Bea behind the heavy marble island. "Stay down," he roared, pulling a sleek, black Glock from a hidden holster under the cabinets. "Leo, what's happening? Is it the feds?" Bea cried over the sound of shattering glass as the front doors were breached. "Worse," Leo growled, chambering around. "It's the Volkov Syndicate. And they aren't here for me, Beatrice. They are here for you." Bea froze. "Me? Why would the Russian mob want a fat diner waitress?" Leo looked at her, his eyes blazing with a mixture of rage and deep, profound guilt. Because Cynthia Davenport wasn't just Richard's wife. She was a cleaner for the Volkovs. And your sister Clara didn't die of a drug overdose, Beatrice. Bea's world stopped spinning. "What?" "Clara was an accountant for a shell company the Volkovs used to launder money," Leo confessed rapidly, as the footsteps of armed men echoed down the hallway toward the kitchen. "She found out too much. She stole a ledger drive before they killed her. She hid it. We believe she mailed the locker key to you, disguised as a cheap pendant necklace you wear every day." Bea's hand instinctively flew to the cheap, heavy brass key she wore on a chain around her neck. Clara had given it to her the week before she died, telling her it was a lucky charm. "You knew," Bea whispered, feeling utterly betrayed. "You didn't marry me for an inheritance. You married me to get the key. I married you to keep you alive," Leo fired back, his voice raw with emotion. "My grandfather was supposed to protect Clara. He failed. I swore on my blood I wouldn't let the Volkovs touch her family. When I found out Richard was working with them to get custody of Lily, just to force you to hand over your sister's belongings, I had to intervene. The marriage was the only way I could legally surround you with my men without triggering an all-out street war." He grabbed her face in his hands, his thumbs aggressively wiping away the tears she didn't know she was shedding. "I didn't plan on this. I didn't plan on you. You are brave, and you are loyal, and you are the most fiercely beautiful woman I have ever known. I will burn Boston to the ground before I let them touch you or that little girl." The kitchen doors burst open. 2 men in tactical gear raised their rifles. Leo didn't hesitate. He stepped out from cover, firing with terrifying, lethal precision. The 2 men dropped instantly. "We need to move to the panic room in the basement. Now!" Leo shouted, grabbing her hand. For the next 10 minutes, Bea lived in a nightmare of gunfire and blood as Leo violently carved a path through the intruders, fighting with the savagery of a man protecting his own heart. When they finally reached the reinforced steel door of the bunker, sealing themselves and a terrified, crying Lily inside, the silence that followed was heavy with adrenaline and truth. Leo sat on the floor, bleeding from a graze on his shoulder, breathing heavily. Bea rushed to him, tearing a strip from her silk robe to press against the wound. "You're hurt," she sobbed, her hands covered in his blood. Leo looked up at her, ignoring the pain. He reached up, tracing the curve of her cheek, his eyes entirely stripped of the cold mob boss facade. "2 years was a lie, Beatrice," he whispered, pulling her down until her forehead rested against his. "If we survive tonight, I'm never letting you go. You are mine. You have always been mine." Bea closed her eyes, the terrifying, beautiful reality washing over her. She had asked for a husband by tomorrow. She ended up with a protector for a lifetime. Beatrice's life flipped from a desperate diner waitress to a mafia queen overnight, proving that sometimes the darkest shadows hide our fiercest protectors. What would you do if a dangerous billionaire offered to solve all your problems for a fake marriage? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this dramatic mafia twist, like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more thrilling, true crime and romance stories.